Hey everybody, welcome to Module 1. And every week what I will do is I'll be providing a short module lecture. And so this week's topic is going to be on municipal governance structures. And usually I will focus our topic based on our particular assignments for the week. Okay, so this week we're going to be exploring local government and the different forms of governance that is applicable to our local communities. What I want to just talk about at first is just a quick overview. In this country, there are over 90,000 local governments here in the U.S. And they have a varied levels of responsibility, organization, and visibility. And what that means is that some are very complex organizations and some are not as complex. So, for example, here on this first slide, that is City Hall for the City of Los Angeles, a very complex government operation serving a city of almost 4 million people. So it's going to vary. I mean, it depends on where you live. If you live in sort of a rural area, your city hall may be relatively small. And so its level of responsibility, organization, and visibility is going to be much different than that of City of Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or someplace of that nature, okay? But what I think is important to remember is that in terms of trust, in a 2014 survey, 72% of citizens surveyed trust local government, and 62% trust state government, and 20% trust the federal government. So the U.S. has really a long tradition of strong local government and strong local government support. Americans generally prefer to keep government as close as possible to the citizens and basically where they can keep an eye on it. And so that's really what happens at the local level. So that's why it's important to understand exactly a little bit more about our local government, and probably just as important is your local government. So there's many faces of local government that I want to just touch on briefly here before we get into some more detailed information. And one of the things I think it's important to understand is the uneven demographic extent of local governments. Because a lot of it's going to be based on state government, it's going to be based on population, it's going to be based on an array of things. So when we look at the uneven demographic extent of local government, what I'm talking about there is for example, Hawaii has no municipalities. It does, however, have 4 counties and the consolidated city-county government of Honolulu. Compare that to Georgia, that has 153 counties, and all of them are vested with municipal-like powers. Also, there are cases like the city of New York, which has a resident population of roughly 8.6 million. While the village of Mon-Owl, Nebraska is, at least as of the last census, the smallest incorporated municipality in the United States, which is 1 resident. So my point here is that the face of local government is going to vary geographically, demographically. In a few minutes, we'll talk a little bit about some of the differences in the governance structure depending on where you live. New England versus the South, East versus the West. So where you live is really going to tell you a lot about the type of governance that your local community uses. And so we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a minute. But just understand that local governments, it's going to vary. Like I said, from the city of New York of 8 million people to that little town I mentioned in Nebraska, which just has 1. It's an incorporated municipality. And so the many face of local government is really going to vary. Continue with the many faces of local government. There are three main types of local government, and we're going to take a look briefly as to how they are different. So you have counties. Counties are geographical and administrative subdivisions of the states. And what that means is oftentimes counties is where programs are administered. For example, the federal government provides state governments with funding, let's say for highway maintenance or road construction. All right, states get that money, and based on the needs of the counties in that subdivision of the state, they will disperse those funds based on some level of formula. The counties will receive those funds, and then the county will disperse them to cities, or some of that will stay within the counties, depending on the needs of local government in terms of road structure and stuff like that. So again, counties are geographical and administrative subdivisions of the states, right? So most states have counties, some don't, depending on your size. But again, they are the subdivision of the states because in some cases it's not very practical for states to have offices in every single part of their geographical boundaries. So we use the concept of counties. Now, municipalities, they are political units distinguished geographically from counties by being more compact and distinguished legally by their independent corporations rather than branch offices of the state. So typically cities are part of a county. So for example, where I worked, I lived in the state of California, the county of San Bernardino, the city of Ontario, which is in San Bernardino. So, and our city was incorporated, and we'll talk about incorporation probably next week, but cities become incorporated. In other words, they develop themselves independent of the county structure, and so cities are typically incorporated, and usually they have an incorporation date. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but just know that they're independent corporations rather than branch offices of state government. They tend to run independent. Then finally, we have special districts. And some of you may be familiar with them, some of you may not. These are single-purpose government units. Unlike counties and cities, which are general-purpose governments, special districts usually are created to provide specific public services rather than a range of services. So what we mean here are things such as school districts, water management, sewage treatment districts are some good examples. Where I lived in Southern California, I lived in a city called Rancho Cucamonga. Odd name, but enough, it was called Rancho Cucamonga. It's incorporated. And one of the special districts that existed in the city where I lived was a fire district. So the fire district was considered a special district. Sort of independent of the city government, but part of it in one respect. But just know that the three forms of local government in the U.S. are counties, municipalities, and special districts. In some cities, such as maybe New York, school districts are all incorporated under the city structure. In many locations, school districts are separate entities. Water management may be separate entities. Fire departments, fire districts may be something different. So just know that we have counties, municipalities, and then we also have some special districts. So when we look at the organization responsibilities of local government, there's a couple things that I think we need to keep in mind here. At the county level, we have different type of elective offices. So think about last time you went and voted at the county level in the city or county where you live. So typically your sheriff is a county level elective office. Judges typically are the district attorney, county assessor, maybe county tax collector, whatever they may be referred to. Okay, those are the type of county level elective offices that exist. Now, when we look at burdens of duties on the county, some things to keep in mind here are that since counties cover the largest amounts of geographical territory, they bear much of the burden of providing services. For example, in California, a majority of citizens in Sacramento County live in the unincorporated territory. So what does that mean? That means they don't live in a city. And so the county provides those services. Their property is not part of any city, town, or township that can provide municipal services. Hence, the burden of those services fall on the county to provide these residents with such services as law enforcement, parks and recreation, stormwater management, and so forth. So I now live in Washington, and I live in Clark County, Washington, and I live in the county area. In other words, the area that I live is not an incorporated city. So the county provides the services for me. They provide services in the form of a sheriff's department, utilities, water. That's all provided by Clark County, not the city of Vancouver, Washington. So that's just an example of how the burden of duties on a county can shift depending on the level of citizens that require services from you. So typically, if a citizen doesn't live in the county area or doesn't live within an incorporated city, then the county needs to provide those services, which are very similar to what cities provide local residents. Now, the organizations and responsibilities of local government are going to vary again. I think a couple things to keep in mind when you look at the difference in autonomy and authority region-wise and how it operates. And again, it's going to be different depending on where you live. For example, in the Northeast, the county attracts most participation, makes the most high-profile decisions, and is the focus of most attention. County governments in this region are historically viewed as just the local offices of state government, representing a form of government and governance more remote than, for example, a village board. In the South, counties are also state governments representing a form of governance that's more, in the South, counties are also technically creatures of state government, but are not the focus. County government ideally tends to be the form of local government that wields the most political power and policy influence, and thus it tends to be the focus of local political elites. The reason for these differences has primarily to do with urban nature of the Northeast compared with the historically more rural South. So where you live is going to influence the level of autonomy and authority region-wise that your county has. So in some places, like in the Northeast, the county is a very important part of local governance, where in the South, it may not be as important. All right, so just again, just to share some ideas on this whole idea of power that state government has on the county. And some of it may, again, deal with the type of region that you're dealing with, whether it's the Northeast, the Southeast, Northwest, and Southwest. The organization responsible for the local government, I'm not going to spend too much time talking on this, but just know that there's, like we'll talk about here with municipal government, you could have a county commission system in which the legislative and executive functions and powers are given to elected board members. You can have a council executive system where the legislative powers are vested in a county commission and the executive powers are vested in an independently elected executive. Some places have that type of setup. Or you can have a commission administrator system, which is an executive and legislative powers reside with the elected commission, okay, and they hire a professional executive to manage the day-to-day operations of county government. So this would be like a chief executive officer of the county, very similar to the city manager under the council manager form of government, okay. I'm going to pause here before we get into step 2 or part 2. All right, thank you guys.